The word embarrassment first got attached to my name when I was 14. That Christmas I asked for a computer instead of clothes. Everyone at the dining room table looked at me like I was a little strange. Mom quickly spoke to explain, using the calm, patient tone she always used when talking about children's silly ideas. "She's going through a phase," Mom said to the relatives. "All this computer nonsense will pass once she discovers boys in makeup." Everyone smiled politely like that made sense. Before I continue, don't forget to subscribe and join the awesome community. Drop a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what you think of the story. But 15 years later, that phase had turned into something that made my family feel uncomfortable almost all the time. While my brother Caius became famous in the world of business, climbing the corporate ladder with amazing precision, I was the family member who always needed explaining. I was the one who was smart, but whose life didn't fit into the usual patterns of what adults considered normal. This pattern started when we were kids and it stayed the same as we grew up. When I graduated from high school as valedictorian, the family focused on Caius making the varsity football team. When I got a full scholarship to MIT, the celebration was about Caius getting accepted to Harvard. When I graduated with not one but 2 degrees in computer science and electrical engineering, the family celebrated Caius landing his first internship at Goldman Sachs. Every time I achieved something big, people were polite, but they talked more about Caius' achievements. Straight A's in advanced math were impressive, but football trophies were displayed in the living room. Academic honors were mentioned briefly in holiday letters, but Caius' friends, connections, and social life were discussed at dinner parties for hours. The difference became even clearer when we entered our 20s. Caius' life was simple and easy to understand. He went to prestigious schools, got a recognizable job, got steady promotions, and married Avelini, a woman from a nice family in the right neighborhood. Their relationship followed the rule book perfectly. College, dating, engagement, wedding, first child. Everything happened at the right time and in the right order. Adults understood it, approved of it, and respected it. My life was different. Instead of following a normal path after MIT, I went back home and lived in the basement, telling everyone I needed time for some personal projects. While Caius impressed executives at Goldman Sachs, I was surrounded by computers, circuit boards, and prototype quantum processors. Nobody in my family understood what I was doing. They didn't even try. "She's always been different," Mom said when neighbors asked about me. "Very bright but not practical. She'll figure things out eventually." Everyone seemed to understand what that meant. I was smart, but I couldn't turn intelligence into what adults call a normal career. I could solve complicated problems that no one else could, but I couldn't navigate simple social expectations. Caius had always been the child our parents dreamed of. Harvard MBA, corner office at Goldman Sachs, wife from a good family, house in the right neighborhood. At 32, he was the perfect example of success. People respected him, understood him, and thought he made the family proud. I was the opposite. No husband, no traditional career, no accomplishments that were easy to talk about at parties. At 29, I was still figuring out my life. I spent my time on computer projects that were impressive to technical people but completely confusing to anyone who worked in normal business. The basement that started as a temporary workspace had grown into a full research lab over 8 years. What started as curiosity about quantum mechanics had turned into real, important breakthroughs for computers. But explaining things like quantum entanglement and superposition to my family was impossible. They thought even normal computers were complicated enough. "She's very dedicated to her research," Dad would tell anyone who asked. Research made it sound important, even though he didn't fully understand what I was doing or why it mattered. This Christmas, the house was full of cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends. It was the kind of party where people talked about money, jobs, and social status. Everyone at the party measured success in ways everyone could understand. Uncle Leander had built a construction company into a multi-million-dollar business. Aunt Serafina ran the city's most exclusive interior design firm. Cousin Orion had just become a partner at his law firm. Success for them was money, clients, and power. Caius had just finished a huge $200 million business deal. Dad explained it to Uncle Leander while I helped Mom arrange appetizers. The client had specifically requested Caius because of his reputation for handling complicated international deals. I watched Caius accept congratulations with calm confidence, the way someone who is used to success always does. For 20 minutes, the conversation focused on Caius' deal. Everyone asked him questions about regulations, strategy, and profit. It was the kind of language everyone understood: business success, measurable outcomes, and creating value. Me? Aunt Serafina finally asked, in a quiet, careful voice like adults use when talking about someone not following a normal path. Dad paused slightly. I had learned that tiny pause. It meant he was about to explain to me gently. She's still working with computers, he said. Doing some kind of technical consulting work. She's very good at that sort of thing. For 8 years I had been building and scaling technology companies. But the details were too complicated for family conversations. My work was too unusual to be called a normal career. Is she seeing anyone? Aunt Serafina asked next. This was the usual question adults ask about family members who don't follow a normal path. She's very focused on her work right now, Mom said carefully. Everyone knew what that meant. I was single and probably always would be, according to the family's view. I had chosen computers over looking for a husband, and now I was nearly 30 with no traditional career or family life. I continued arranging cheese and crackers, listening to family members talk politely about me. This happened at every gathering. People cared, but they didn't understand the life I had chosen. They thought I was stubborn, ignoring better opportunities that Caius Network could have given me. When we moved into the living room for a pre-dinner social hour, I stayed in my usual corner. Caius sat near the fireplace, Avellini beside him, talking about their upcoming trip to Switzerland. Their 3-year-old daughter played on the floor with educational toys that promised to make her smarter. Uncle Caius is taking us skiing in the Alps, Avellini said. The resort has a private helicopter to reach the best slopes. Caius' bonus this year was huge. The conversation focused on Caius' life. Private schools, investment properties, and social connections in Manhattan. Every detail showed how successful they were. Avellini talked about how the headmaster at Riverside Prep personally welcomed their daughter because she was in the 99th percentile for cognitive ability. Everything showed that Caius and Avellini were living the perfect life our parents had hoped for. I stayed quietly in my corner chair. This was my spot at family gatherings, the place for people who were present but not part of the main story. Caius belonged in the center because everyone understood and admired his achievements. I stayed on the side because my work seemed mysterious and meaningless to most people. Callista, tell everyone about your computer work, Mom said during a pause in the Caius conversation. Her voice was gentle, like a parent trying to include a child who doesn't quite fit in. It's mostly technical stuff, I replied, keeping it vague like I had learned to do over the years. Even though I tried to sound simple, I could feel my family thinking, what does that even mean? Nobody really understood the hours, the work, or the ideas I was working on. They could see computers and machines, but they couldn't see the importance of the projects, the way the ideas could change technology in the future. For my family, success was clear and measurable. Money, power, social status. For me, success was complicated, unseen, and sometimes invisible to people who didn't work in technology. They measured life in trophies, promotions, and fancy trips. I measured life in ideas, discoveries, and inventions. I watched Caius talk to the guests, answering questions about his deal, his job, and his family. Everyone laughed at his jokes, nodded at his ideas, and asked for advice. I stayed in my corner, quietly observing, not part of the conversation that everyone understood. The longer I watched, the more I realized how different my life was from Caius. He had a life story that was easy to explain. I had a life story that didn't fit into easy words or simple explanations. My story was full of experiments, ideas, and risks. His story was full of certainty, planning, and achievements that everyone could understand. When the adults asked about my work, I gave short answers. I could tell they didn't know what to do with the answers even if I explained more. Their eyes would glaze over when I talked about quantum computers or algorithms. Their brains couldn't process it because it was too technical, too abstract, too unlike the real work they were used to. So I liked what I did. I enjoyed working on computers, building ideas, and solving problems no one else could solve. I knew that even if my family didn't understand, my work was important. I could feel the breakthroughs happening under my hands, in my lab, in the machines I had built. Sometimes I wished my family could see it the way I did. Sometimes I wished they would understand that life didn't have to follow a simple path to be meaningful. But I also understood that their world was different. Their success was tangible, visible, and easy to explain. My success was invisible, complicated, and hard to explain. I arranged one more plate of cheese and crackers and smiled politely as Aunt Serafina leaned closer and whispered, "I hope she figures it out soon." Mom nodded, giving a quiet smile. Everyone said kind words, but it was clear they didn't truly know what to make of me. Even at nearly 30, I was still the family's different one. I didn't have the trophies, the trips, or the career everyone could brag about. But I had my computers, my ideas, my research, and my inventions. That was my life, and even if it didn't make sense to anyone else, it made sense to me. And that's how our Christmas gathering went. Caius in the center, successful and admired. Me in the corner, quiet but busy in my own way. The difference between our lives had been there since childhood and continued through adulthood. I was the family's ongoing puzzle, the one everyone had to explain with patience. But I knew something they didn't. My work might not be easy to explain now, but it has the power to change the world someday. Working with databases, making computer systems faster, and trying new kinds of super smart computers might sound boring if you're not into it. Caius laughed, a little like he thought he was better than me. It wasn't mean, but it made it clear he was in charge at work. Sometimes adults act that way without realizing how it feels to the person they're talking to. Callista has always been better with machines than with people. Some people are just better at certain things. Computers, gadgets, and machines were easy for me to understand, but social rules, talking with people, and understanding their feelings felt confusing. The adults around us nodded like they agreed that I had found the right kind of job for me. They thought I was okay with working with computers because other things like dealing with big business problems or tricky clients were too hard for me. From their point of view, they weren't completely wrong. I liked solving computer problems that had clear answers more than dealing with the confusing way people act at work. I felt happy when I fixed something that worked instead of trying to figure out complicated office politics that needed other skills. Computers always followed the rules. People did not. "That's wonderful that you found something you enjoy," said Aunt Serafina. She sounded very excited, like when kids talk about their hobbies. It's good to have things you like, even if they don't turn into normal careers. She and the whole family thought my computer work was a harmless hobby that made me happy but wouldn't make me famous or rich. Like someone who liked gardening or collecting stamps, I had a hobby that suited me. But it wasn't the kind of thing that showed success to the rest of the world. When it was time to exchange gifts, everyone got presents that showed their place in the family. Caius and Avellini got fancy gifts to show they had money and good taste. Scarves from Italy, expensive wine, fancy jewelry. They also gave fancy gifts to others. My gifts were useful, not fancy. I gave books about new technology, software for making programs, and special tools for my little basement lab. Dad looked at the quantum computing book I gave him and said, "This looks very advanced." But we both knew he wouldn't read past the first chapter. My family always acted polite about my technical gifts, even if they didn't really understand them. After dinner, people started talking about plans for the next year. Caius talked about getting promoted at work and all the office politics that came with it. Avellini talked about their daughter going to a very special preschool that would help her get into elite schools later. Other relatives talked about their promotions, new houses, and other successes. Uncle Leander's construction company got big new contracts. Aunt Serafina was in a famous magazine for redesigning a celebrity's home. Then someone asked me, "What about you, Callista? Any big plans for next year?" It was cousin Celine. She was 2 years older than me and just got promoted at a big company. Her job was exactly the kind of successful path our family liked. Titles, promotions, clear steps forward. Before I could answer, Caius' phone rang. It was an important call, so he left to take it. I said carefully, "I'm working on some interesting projects. Still early, but could be important later." The family listened politely, but they were used to hearing about my projects that never seemed to make me rich or famous. "That's wonderful," Mom said kindly. "Remember, it's okay to be happy with what you have." Her words were meant to be comforting, but it hurt a little. It showed me that my family didn't really believe I could do anything big in life. They cared about me, but they thought I should stick to safer, more normal paths. Caius came back from his call looking proud of himself. "Sorry about that," he said. "Business never stops, even on Christmas. Global markets don't care about holidays." Dad asked him questions, really interested in his work. Caius talked about a big expansion for his company and possible promotions. Everyone was impressed because this was a kind of success they understood. Titles, money, respect. As the evening went on, I felt more and more left out. While my family celebrated normal achievements, I was working on things they couldn't understand. I realized our paths were very different. Caius was climbing a ladder everyone could see. I was building something invisible to them. Later, while cleaning up dessert plates, Caius said quietly, "It's not too late to try a normal career. I could probably get you a job at Goldman Sachs, maybe in tech support. Not glamorous, but steady work with good benefits." He really meant it to be helpful. In his mind, any job at a big financial company was better than what I was doing in the basement. "The tech support division handles the computers for our trading work," he said. "You'd be perfect for it." He thought I was good with computers but not ready for leadership or client work. I thanked him politely, saying, "I'll think about it." But as I watched him go back to the center of attention, I realized how different our lives were. He had a job everyone could see and measure while I was making something only I could understand. The moment hit me clearly near the end of the evening when everyone was getting ready to leave. Cousin Celine was talking about her job search after being laid off. She said, "It must be nice to have Caius as a brother. He can open doors and help you. Not everyone has that advantage." Before I could answer, Caius laughed. "I don't think Callista wants my help. She prefers doing her own thing even if it means staying at entry level forever." His words carried years of frustration because I refused to follow his path or advice. In his mind, I was wasting my potential when I had easy options through him. "Actually," Celine said, speaking more honestly after a little whine, "I think it's time someone said what we're all thinking." I looked around the room and realized how differently everyone saw the world. They thought success meant money, titles, houses, and respect. I thought success meant solving problems, understanding computers, and building things that worked. Their success was shiny and visible. Mine was quiet, invisible, and hard to explain. Even the way they talked about me made me feel small. "She's smart," they would say. "But she's happier with her computer stuff than real work." It sounded nice, but it also meant they didn't think I could do what they did. They assumed that because I liked computers I couldn't handle people, money, or big responsibilities. Sometimes I wished they could see what I was building. My projects weren't just toys. They had potential. Someday they could help people in ways my family couldn't imagine. But at this Christmas dinner, no one cared about potential. They cared about what you could show right now: your title, your house, your fancy car, or your promotion. When Caius talked about his board presentation, everyone listened like it was the most exciting story ever. They asked questions about his job, his clients, and how he would get promoted. Everyone wanted to know how he was doing, how much money he made, and what new things he could buy. It made sense to them. Success could be measured in numbers and visible results. When I tried to explain my projects, their eyes would glaze over. I could see it. My words didn't make sense to them. Quantum computing, programming, or advanced software sounded like magic or gibberish. I could talk about it, but only a little, and I had to make it simple so they wouldn't get lost. Still, they listened politely because that's what good family members do. After dessert, I helped clean up. Caius stayed in the living room talking about business calls, promotions, and his future. I stayed in the kitchen stacking plates and thinking about my projects. My basement lab felt like my real world, a place where I mattered. In that world, I could create, experiment, and solve problems. In the living room, I felt small, like my work didn't count. I remembered all the times Caius tried to help me. He would say, "Callista, you should get a normal job. You're wasting your skills." He meant it kindly, but it always made me feel like I wasn't enough. He believed that a big company job with nice benefits and a clear path was the only way to succeed. He didn't see that I was already succeeding in my own way. Mom tried to comfort me. "It's okay to be happy with what you have," she said. But it hurt because it felt like she was telling me to settle, to accept that I wouldn't achieve what my family valued. Their idea of success didn't include what I was building. It made me feel invisible. As relatives gathered coats and said goodbyes, I felt tired but thoughtful. My family would never understand my projects. They would never celebrate them the way they celebrated promotions, new houses, or fancy gifts. But that was okay. I didn't need their approval to know that I was doing important work. My satisfaction came from understanding, creating, and solving problems that mattered to me. Cousin Celine, still talking after a little whine, said, "I think it's time someone said what we're all thinking." I could hear the judgment in her voice. They all assumed I was lost, that my basement lab and computer experiments were just hobbies for someone who didn't have real ambition. Caius, smiling proudly, added, "She prefers doing her own thing. That's just who she is." It sounded like he was protecting me from criticism, But it also made me feel like they didn't believe I could handle the big world outside our family. They had already decided I would never succeed the way they had. I took a deep breath and smiled politely as I always did. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain my projects in detail. It was useless. They wouldn't understand. And that was fine. I had my own path and it was different, quiet and unseen. While everyone celebrated visible successes, I would keep building, experimenting and learning. Maybe one day what I was doing would matter in a way my family could see. Until then, I had to be satisfied knowing that I was doing something important in my own way, even if no one else understood it. That night, after everyone left, I went to my basement. The lights glowed softly over my computers and tools. I smiled. This was my world. My rules. My success. And even if the rest of the family didn't see it, I knew it was real. I was building something meaningful even if it looked like just hobbies to everyone else. And as I looked around my little lab, I felt something quiet and strong inside me. It didn't matter that Caius had a title, that Celine had a promotion, or that the family thought I was failing. I was learning, growing, and creating. And that was worth more than any award, title, or fancy gift. The room got very quiet. Everyone in the family could feel that someone was about to say something serious. The kind of thing that made people hold their breath for a moment. Celine, my cousin, moved to the center of the living room. She stood tall, chest out, like she was the captain of the family. She wanted everyone to listen to what she had to say. "Callista, you are becoming an embarrassment to this family," she said. Her words cut through the quiet like a sharp knife. Everyone stopped talking, stopped even moving. "You're almost 30. You're still single. You still play with computers like a teenager. And you won't accept help from people who have really succeeded in the real world." The room was frozen. My relatives didn't know what to say. Even though they all liked me, they felt Celine's words were true. They had been thinking them quietly for a long time but never dared to say them. Now Celine had said them out loud. Caius, my older brother, nodded slowly. He didn't say it as loudly as Celine did, but he agreed with what she said. "Finally, someone said it," he whispered quietly. Relief showed on his face. He had been wanting to say the same thing but wasn't brave enough to speak first. Mom looked uncomfortable. She always hated it when family members were too harsh with each other, but this time she didn't argue with Celine. Dad stared at his hands. He didn't want to look at me because he knew he didn't understand the choices I had made. Other family members didn't speak either, but their silence said it all. They agreed with Celine. "You had potential," Celine continued, her voice growing stronger. She seemed very passionate, like she really believed she was helping me. "You had good grades, a smart family, every advantage you could need. But instead of building something important, you've spent 15 years on a hobby that goes nowhere. And now you're too old to start over properly." It felt like the room was filled with a heavy fog of disappointment. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for me to respond. This was the conversation that had been waiting for years. Everyone had been polite about my choices, but now they were being completely honest. I stayed calm. "I understand," I said quietly. My voice was soft but steady. That was all I needed to say. Everyone seemed satisfied that I had listened. Celine nodded like she had won a big victory. Caius looked relieved. Mom began picking up plates, trying to make everything normal again. The air was still heavy, but at least it wasn't tense anymore. Just as the room started to relax a little, Dad's phone rang. It had a special ring that he used only for important work calls. He looked at it and froze. The name on the screen made him pause. "It's Evander Thompson from the Times," Dad said to Mom. He sounded proud and serious. Evander Thompson was a very important journalist who had written about Dad's work before. Dad always talked about him as someone very special in his business life. "Dave, I'm sorry to call on Christmas," Evander said. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I need to check something for a story I'm working on. Is your daughter really Callista Chin, who Forbes just named America's youngest billionaire?" The words hit the room like a lightning bolt. Everyone stopped moving. Even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking for a moment. Dad's face went through so many expressions as he tried to understand. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He blinked. He looked confused. "I'm sorry, what?" Dad said quietly. His voice shook a little. Evander continued, sounding excited. "Callista Chin, 29, founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics. Forbes just released their youngest billionaire list an hour ago and she's number 1. Her net worth is $3.8 billion. Can you get me an exclusive interview with her? The room was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. This wasn't the normal quiet of people thinking. It was the shocked quiet of everyone realizing that everything they thought they knew about the family was wrong. Caius stared at me. His mouth was slightly open. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Celine turned pale. She suddenly realized that she had just called a billionaire an embarrassment. Her face went from confident to shocked in less than a second. Evander didn't realize the chaos he had caused in our living room. Quantum dynamics, he said, has completely changed quantum computing for finance and data. Their IPO last month broke every record. Your daughter built this from nothing in her basement lab. Dad was holding the phone like it might explode. His hand was shaking slightly. For 15 years he had thought I was wasting my time on computers. But all that work, all those late nights, all those secret projects had been building something amazing. Something he couldn't even begin to understand. Dave, are you still there? Evander asked. He could sense the unusual quiet on the other end of the line. This is huge news. Forbes is calling her the most important young entrepreneur of her generation. Can you connect me with her? All eyes in the room were on me. Everyone was staring, their faces showing disbelief, confusion, and slowly dawning realization. The family embarrassment they had just scolded was actually America's youngest billionaire. While they had been worried about me, while they had thought I was wasting my life, I had been building a $3.8 billion company. While they had been suggesting safe, ordinary jobs, I had been creating something extraordinary. Something no one could have imagined. Actually, Dad said slowly, his voice shaking, she's right here. The room went completely silent. The laughter from before had disappeared. The family had been confident about my failures, but now they had to face the truth. Everything they thought was wrong. Everything they believed about me was upside down. Caius' phone started buzzing. His friends and colleagues were sending him links about the Forbes announcement. His face changed as he read about the company he had never heard of, built by his own sister. Callista, Mom whispered, is this true? Before I could answer, Celine's phone beeped with a news alert. Then Aunt Seraphina's. Then Uncle Leander's. Everyone could see the news spreading in real time. The youngest billionaire in America was sitting in their living room, the same person they had just told to accept her limitations. This company, I said quietly, quantum dynamics has been my focus for the past 8 years. It went public last month. The words sank into the room like a heavy blanket. While the family thought I was wasting time with my computer hobby, I had been building a company that made me one of the richest people in the country. For years I had quietly worked on my projects, hiding in my basement, focusing on my ideas instead of family criticism. I had chosen to be invisible, to let people think what they wanted so I could work without distraction. And now that strategy had worked perfectly. While the family had been talking about my failures, I had been creating a technology empire. While they worried about my career, I had been building something that would change industries. While they suggested small, safe steps, I had taken big, bold leaps. Celine, who had spoken so loudly about my failures, now looked down at her hands. Her confidence had vanished. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The person she had called an embarrassment was now the family's greatest success story. Caius still had his mouth open. His eyes were wide, his face a mix of shock and awe. Dad held the phone, his hands still trembling. Mom looked at me, her eyes full of a mix of confusion, pride, and happiness. Evander Thompson on the phone didn't notice the silence in the living room. He was still talking about the company, the IPO, and how my work had changed quantum computing. But the rest of the family couldn't focus on him. They were too busy trying to understand what had just happened. This is incredible, Evander said. I've never seen someone so young achieve so much. Can you connect me with her now? Yes, Dad said, his voice now a little steadier but still amazed. She's right here. Everyone finally started breathing again. The tension in the room slowly turned into amazement and pride. The family had underestimated me for years, and now they were seeing the truth. The person they had called a failure had become a billionaire. The family embarrassment had become a legend. I spoke calmly. Quantum dynamics has been my main focus for 8 years. I built it from my basement, and last month it went public. That's what Forbes is reporting. The room absorbed the news slowly. Everyone looked at me in a new way. The quiet acceptance of my failures had disappeared. Instead, they now saw me as someone who had done something incredible, something they had never imagined possible. The strategy of staying invisible had worked perfectly. The person who seemed like an embarrassment had turned into the family's most remarkable success. The Christmas gathering had changed completely in a few minutes. Celine finally looked up. Her eyes were wide and her face had gone pale. I didn't know, she whispered. Caius shook his head slowly. I can't believe it, he said. Mom smiled softly. Callista, we are so proud of you, she said. Dad's hand stopped shaking. He looked at me, his eyes full of pride and a little awe. You've done something amazing, he said. The room was still filled with a heavy sense of shock, but it was now mixed with pride, amazement, and a little bit of guilt for underestimating me. While the family had been focused on my failures, I had quietly built a company that made history. While they had been giving me advice to be normal, I had taken the road less traveled, and it had led to something extraordinary. The room slowly began to buzz with conversation again, but now it was different. It was full of questions, admiration, and excitement. Everyone wanted to know more about quantum dynamics, about the work I had done, and about how I had become the youngest billionaire in America. And just like that, the family's understanding of reality had been completely changed. The embarrassment they had once seen in me had disappeared, replaced by pride, amazement, and respect. The quiet, the tension, the judgment, all of it had turned into celebration of something extraordinary. The Christmas gathering, which had started with disappointment and criticism, ended with astonishment and pride. For years I had hidden my true achievements. Now the family finally saw the full picture. The person they had doubted, criticized, and thought would fail had become the family's greatest success story. The family embarrassment had become the family legend. Even Celine, who had been so confident in her judgment, had to accept the truth. Everyone had to accept the truth. My unconventional path, my secret work, and my quiet determination had built something amazing. Something bigger than anyone could have imagined. And in that moment I realized that staying calm, staying focused, and believing in my own path had been the best decision I could ever make. The family had learned a powerful lesson. Never underestimate what someone can achieve, even if it doesn't look like much at first.